We're going to be looking at today a headline from a couple of weeks back that will get us on a discussion about animal ethics in Jewish thought and law, and has some resonance to another topic from a couple months back. And let's take a look at the source. And it has to do with monkeys. And so there's a headline back from November 7th that was about 43 monkeys escaped from a South Carolina medical lab. Police say there's no serious danger. So this was in the Associated Press a couple of weeks ago. 43 monkeys escaped from a compound used for medical research in South Carolina, but the nearby police chief says almost no danger to the public. Very reassuring. Almost no danger to the public. They are not infected with any disease whatsoever. They were harmless and a little skittish. Yemasi Police Chief Gregory Alexander said Thursday morning. The rhesus macaque primates escaped from the Alpha Genesis facility Wednesday when a new employee didn't fully shut an enclosure, Alexander said. The monkeys are females weighing about 7 pounds, are so young and small they hadn't been used for testing, police said. Rounding up these escapees is taking some more work. Alpha Genesis is taking the lead, setting up traps using thermal imaging cameras to recapture the monkeys on the run. Alpha Genesis provides primates for research worldwide at its compound 50 miles northeast of Savannah, Georgia, according to its website. The company did not respond to an email asking about Wednesday's escape. 2018, federal officials fined Alpha Genesis $12,600 after dozens of primates escaped as well for an incident that left a few others without water and other problems with how the monkeys were housed. The group Stop Animal Exploitation Now sent a letter to the U.S. Department of Agriculture asking the agency to immediately send an inspector to the Alpha Genesis facility, conduct a thorough investigation, treat them as a repeated violator. The group was involved in the 2018 fine against the company. The clear carelessness which allowed these 40 monkeys to escape endangered not only the safety of the animals, but also put the residents of South Carolina at risk, Michael Budke, the executive director of the group, wrote in a Thursday morning letter. So we have here a classic case, well, not a classic case because you had monkeys that escaped, but here you have a case of experiments being done, although these monkeys had no experiments done on them yet. They were too young. But in the past, there had been some concerns about the treatment of those monkeys, and in particular, maybe this company in particular was not treating the animals properly. When I saw this article, it brought to mind that there was a movie out from a long time ago called Project X. Don't know if anyone saw it. Matthew Broderick. They're experimenting on monkeys with radiation, and it's almost, life imitates art. If anyone's wondering what happened, a week later, only 8 monkeys remained free, and they have been lured back with peanut butter jelly sandwiches and other treats, officials said. So monkeys are like us. They offer them some treats, and they'll come running. So this. The question is how this works out in terms of our responsibility towards animals. What is our responsibility towards animals in terms of treating them right? We know there's a mitzvah tsar ba'alei chayim. There's an obligation to treat animals and not cause them pain, and it's a halachic issue which comes up. But, in particular, a couple of things that stood out, in terms of the company saying they take proper care of it, although those who complained against it said that they were not treating them properly. Clear carelessness, which allowed these 40 monkeys to escape, was endangering the safety of the animals and people. And so how does that play out from a religious perspective? I was reading an article on this subject of treatment to animals from Rabbi Yitzchak Grossman from the Beis Havad Halacha Center. And he had actually explored this from an article by another rabbi a couple of months back, Rabbi Yair Hoffman. Some of you may have been paying attention with a couple of months back, there was the question about there was a bit of a kerfuffle made when South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem killed her dog. This was back when there was a discussion about whether she'd be a vice presidential candidate, and there were a couple of articles that tried to say, from a halachic perspective, was that behavior appropriate or inappropriate, disqualify or not disqualify a person? Is it acting with the proper midot, ethics and morals? So there's some overlap in terms of the treatment of animals there, but here we're going to go into a discussion in terms of treatment of animals. and the ethical treatment of animals and the like. And I think, many of us are assuming, from the meat that we eat to the leather that we wear, that there's certainly the opportunity and permissibility of using animals for human purposes. The question is, how far does that extend in a halachic perspective, as well as from a midos perspective, from a morals and ethics perspective, how that plays out. Before we jump into some Jewish sources, any questions, comments, or reactions to presenting the story? Okay, so there's a Gemara in Bava Metzia, and it's a famous story of the passing of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, the final moments of his life. But not everyone knows the whole story. Basically, there was a story that in his final days he was suffering, and there's a whole discussion on this from how to treat end of life. But some of the causes where the background of the story is less well known. Source number 3, the sufferings of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi came as the result of an event and left as a result of an event. What does it mean they came as a result of an event? What was this event? There was once a calf they were leading to slaughter, and went and hung its head among the folds of Rebbe's garment, and it cried. Rebbe told it, "Go, for this is what you were created." The said in heaven, "Since he does not show mercy, let suffering come upon him." Right? There was a little shepsela, a little sheep that was being taken to slaughter, and it turned to Rebbe and tried to find protection in the folds of Rebbe's clothing to save itself from slaughter. And Rebbe said, "No, this is what you're created for." And the heavenly voice said, you didn't show compassion, then you're going to suffer. Okay, the Gemara continues. And they left as a result of an event. How did the suffering end? One day, Rebbe's maidservant was sweeping the house. There was a little litter of baby weasels that had been cast upon the floor, and she was sweeping them up. Rebbe told her, "Leave them be. It is written, and his mercy is upon all his creations." We say that verse every day during Ashrei. So they said in heaven, "Since he shows mercy, let us show mercy to him." And Rebbe passed away and no longer was suffering any pain. So he was punished for ignoring the suffering of the sheep, and he was released from acknowledging the suffering of the baby weasels. And this Gemara serves as a proof text for a discussion as to how people should act, not necessarily how people must act. So source number 4, Rabbi Yisrael Isserlin, who was the author of the Trumat Hadeshen, and we're talking, now in the late 14th. He really is active in the 15th century. It's a major resource and source for Ashkenazi practice. So anything that is necessary, source number 5, for medical treatment or for other purposes, is not subject to Tsar Balei Chayim. Sorry. Although it was absolutely permitted to slaughter the calf, Rabbi Yehuda was nevertheless punished and received suffering for doing so. Right? The idea that it was permissible action, but it wasn't midos. It wasn't the right proper behavior. He should have been nicer about the subject. And Rabbi Moshe Isserlis, the Ramah, writing the next century in the collection of Halacha, in his comments on the Shulchan Aruch, says, anything that is necessary for medical treatment for other purposes, not subject to Tsar Balei Chayim, is accordingly permitted to pluck feathers from live geese, and there's no concern for Tsar Balei Chayim. But people nevertheless avoid doing so because it constitutes cruelty. So there's what's allowed, and then there's how one should behave. And there seems to be a lifnim mishurat hadin, going above the letter of the law, as it pertains to treatment of animals, and that was something that the Rabbah was sensitive to. Rabbi Yisrael Isserlin, there's no halachic issue, but maybe there's a moral issue. And Rabbi Moshe Isserlis, the Ramah, says similarly, it's not a halachic issue of causing pain to the animal, but there is an idea of there is a moral issue. And so I don't think this is anything that is surprising, because, like we said in the beginning, the meat that we eat and the leather that we wear comes from animals. We know the animals are there for serving us. And that's reflected in the sources. The Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda was held accountable for being cruel to animals and was rewarded for being kinder and gentler towards them. Halacha says this is not a halachic obligation, but it's maybe a moral imperative, and this is how a person should behave. Questions, comments, reactions? So if we take this a little bit further into a period of time that in the late 19th century, there were a number of articles and a number of authorities who addressed some of the issues of the day, especially as medicine progressed and as more experiments were being done. The issue came up again, not only in from a halachic perspective, but also from just a societal perspective. There was a whole what was called the anti-vivisectionist movement, the idea of not harming animals, even for medical experimentation purposes. And there was a Rabbi Eliyahu Kalatskin who lived in the late 19th, early 20th century. And he addressed this issue in his work, Imre Shefer. Source number 6. It's also not clear that it's permitted to cause a living creature to suffer so much terrible pain for the sake of examinations and experiments. And we only find that this was permitted for the sake of healing, not for the sake of examination, which is only a matter of possibility, that perhaps some benefit to medical science will emerge from it. Among the scholars of the nations, there are also those who are upset and complain about the acts of cruelty that the investigators perform in their examinations of the bodies of living creatures, and they founded the Society of Anti-Vivisectionists. So this was something that was known to Rabbi Kalatskin, and he referenced it and says, I think along the lines of what we're seeing developing. If there's a halachic imperative, then there's an opportunity to do whatever is necessary for the sake of science, or not for the sake of science, for the sake of human health and human well-being. But if it's only, quote unquote, for the sake of science, then that might not be enough, right? There has to be medical benefit. And if it's not so clear that the medical benefit, direct medical benefit will come from this, it's only, quote, as he says, for the sake of examination, then it's not so clear that it is permissible. Some of this language is also used with regards to when we talk about autopsies in Jewish law. Right? In general, we know that we don't perform autopsies. We have kavod hames, respect for the remains. We don't do anything to them. We're very careful about it, right? Even, as we know all too clearly and acutely from the past year, every piece of blood, every limb, every organ, all pieces of tissue should be collected and buried appropriately. And therefore, you don't want to open up a cadaver and do scientific experimentation. What effect the fact that it will save lives? Question is, how direct is the examination for saving a life? And this is a halachic subject that has larger ramifications. They talk, for example, within the discussion about a Kohen becoming a doctor. Many of us have heard this idea that Kohanim can't be doctors because they can come into contact with tumas mace, they come into contact with the corpse, with the impurity of death, but you need someone to save a life. And maybe this Kohen is perfectly suited, will be a great doctor. Does it have to be him? Is it b'kuach nefesh or not? Or they talk about with regards to activities on Shabbos. Obviously, b'kuach nefesh, we say, is doche Shabbos. We save a life no matter what, even violate Shabbos for the sake of the person. But how much of those activities? Something that we've discussed before in different contexts. It's one thing to turn on the light. It's one thing to do a surgery. What about writing the charts and the paperwork that go along with that? And this is something that gets discussed. Obviously, in Israel, it's discussed even more so because of the Jewishness of the state and the Jewishness of the doctors. And that's why if you go to a number of these hospitals, Shaarei Tzedek, Bikur Cholim, Laniado Hospital, and in Netanya in particular, hospitals that were founded with this in mind, there's more of a sensitivity towards, obviously, save a life, set aside Shabbos. But what about the more ancillary activities? And there's a whole Institute of Science and Halacha, as well as SOMET, that comes to try and find ways to have as fully functioning a facility as possible while being sensitive to these concerns. We mentioned that last week was the Sigda holiday for the Ethiopian Jewish community. And I may have mentioned at other times or separately that Ethiopian Jewish community has very different rules for certain parts of Judaism because of the fact that they developed so far outside of the mainstream. They don't really have a rabbinic tradition, and they also don't have the same oral tradition, because that oral tradition was reinforced over the generations. The Ethiopian Jewish community kind of sways away from the mainstream Jewish community in the Second Temple era. So, for example, Ethiopian Jews do eat chicken and milk together, because it's only meat and milk together that we don't eat as part of a biblical law. But the rabbi said chicken and milk can't be eaten together. Well, the Ethiopians didn't have those rabbis. Another area of the Jewish tradition that they don't have, I mentioned this, I think, the high holiday times, that the Ethiopian Jewish community doesn't fast when Yom Kippur is on Shabbos, because that is a part of the oral tradition. The idea that we fast on Yom Kippur even on Shabbos was reinforced by part of the oral tradition, and with the rabbis amplifying that decision. I always like to joke, if we wanted to incorporate Ethiopian customs, we would eat on Yom Kippur when it fell on Shabbos, and we actually have a kiddush when Yom Kippur fell on Shabbos, and we'd serve chicken parmesan. But if we wanted to be, I guess, glot Ethiopian. And the reason why I mentioned this segue is also with the Ethiopian Jewish community doesn't have the same attention or emphasis on pikuach nefesh doche Shabbos, because the idea that we can violate Shabbos to save a life is also something that has an oral tradition origins that was then amplified by the rabbis, that they didn't have as much as part of their tradition. In any event, Ethiopian Jews today, for the most part, as they have come to Israel and become part of the more mainstream Israel community, some of these more unique practices that were part of their tradition that developed outside the mainstream is now mainstreaming. It's a fascinating subject, obviously more detail for another time. But when it comes to animal experimentation or saving lives, that for sure is clear cut. But what about just for examination that doesn't have a direct health or life-saving benefit? Rabbi Kalaskin is sympathetic to the Society of Anti-Vivisectionists of his time. In a similar vein, Rabbi Yaakov Zev Kahana, also writing in this period, addressed the subject. Source number 7. How good and how pleasant it is that in our times men of science and sensitivity have innovated in the idea of alleviating pain of all creatures as much as possible. They've established various societies to supervise this, to see to it that animals should not carry more than is appropriate for them. And if horses have dry skin infections or moist skin eruptions or boils, they will issue an order against traveling with them until return to their original strength. And if any of these things are found in anyone's possession, he will surely be punished, both with money and with imprisonment. They also seize the horses and wagoners that make a living for them to ensure that they will be careful not to do so in the future. Right? This is kind of sounding like an animal rights activist, and who is pleased that there are those who are standing in the way, who are advocating for animals and to not let the sick animals work too hard and not put them into contact with human beings. Right? He doesn't talk about what the health benefit is to human beings, but he's talking about in the defense of the animals. He further writes, source number 8, those men who spend their time in sport of baiting dogs against pigs or against other animals will certainly face judgment in the future. Therefore, it appears to me that as a mitzvah incumbent upon anyone who sees oxen goring each other or chickens striking each other to separate them in such a manner that they will not come to gore or strike each other again. For this is included in the mitzvah of parika, unloading, as explained above mitzvah 32a. No cockfighting for Rabbi Kahana. And even with respect to minors who are accustomed to catch and trap small animals like flies and mosquitoes, they inflict severe pain upon them. Adults are certainly obligated to separate them from this prohibition. So they will not do such things anymore. I remember that when I was young, I caught some creature for sport in the manner of children. My father rebuked me. Also remember that my father, master of the rock, would not allow poisonous water to be placed before flies, because before they die, they suffer extreme pain. So he would instead drive them out of the house for expulsion. It is easier upon them than being given to drink a cup of these bitter waters. So there is, definitely a sensitivity towards mistreating animals. Reading the extent that Rabbi Kahana goes and talking about the sensitivity that he is advocating for that his father had. It brought to mind the sukkah bee traps that there are. So do you put out, is it the poison, or what about the ones that you put the meat inside and they get lost? Is that what kind of, is that psychological pain? Is that better than the physical pain? So these are things that we don't think about.
Drown. They
Right,
drown
right.
in the
So
juice.
so it's that level of sensitivity is not one that we often associate with the treatment of animals. But it's one that exists, and in a sense, that I believe is certainly lifnim mishurat hadin. It's going beyond the letter of the law. There is this gray area of, well, is it of direct necessity towards human beings for the animals to undergo these experimentations? Then beyond that, being extra sensitive towards the animals not to suffer pain. We see even the extent of flies. Shoo them out of the house, don't kill them. And we see a kind of a direct correlation of this in terms of sensitivity from Rav Avram Meir Israel in source number 9, and he's talking about interaction he had with Rabbi Michal Ber Weissmandel from the Nitra Yeshiva. He was a Hungarian rabbi, survived the Holocaust, set up this yeshiva in Mount Kisco in Westchester County, and he's recounting a discussion they had about this subject. About 20 years ago, I heard this from the mouth of the Gaon and Tzaddik Rabbi Michal Ber Weissmandel of Nitra when I met him on a train. Through the window, he showed me cows grazing in the marshland. They were running wildly to and fro, unlike the normal manner of grazers who walk slowly, step by step. He explained to me the cause of the cows' disquiet was because of their sadness that the males to which they were naturally drawn are withheld from them. So they live with sadness and discomfort. He subsequently expressed his opinion that perhaps the reason the sadness has increased in the world is because people drink the milk of anxious cows. And if it is a tradition, we accept it. So this might be taking it a little further, but there was a recognition of the fact that you see those cows wandering aimlessly. They're unhappy cows. What is it when there's that cheese called the happy cow cheese or something? There's something to be said from the anxiety that's being caused these cows that could be problematic. He doesn't go far to say that it's not allowed, that it's not kosher, the milk. That's something that's halachically wrong with them, but there's something off about these anxious cows because of how they are raised and treated and the like. Now, this does bring to mind that there are those who have suggested that the way dairy cows are treated today can be halachically problematic. They say this in the name, they quote Rav Herschel Schechter talking about this in contemporary society, that the way the cows are treated and the way they're fed, and the way they graze, and the way they're held and maintained, it's very possible, maybe even very likely, that the cows become what's called a treifa. They become treif, right? And just to review, right, we always talk about treif as being not kosher. Treif literally means torn, and the rabbis have a tradition that there are certain injuries that cause an animal to be a treifa. In halachic terminology, in Jewish legal sense, this means that the animal will die within the year. And these wounds, injuries, conditions mean the animal will die within the year. That means the animal is not kosher. For an animal to be kosher, even a cow, which chooses cut and has split hooves, can't be a treifa. It can't have one of these injuries or conditions that will cause it to die within 12 months. And so the rabbis have a list of these conditions and these injuries and these wounds, and they're etched in stone as being in the category of treifa. What about the fact that maybe animals will live longer than that today? So this is a subject that later authorities talk about in terms of the changing conditions, and if conditions change, and if the animal living more than 12 months means it's not a treifa and the like. That's a discussion in the Gemara in Chulin. It's a discussion in the realm of kashrus, more theoretical today than in the practical realm. So, but Rabbi Schechter feels that the way the cows are treated, fed, maintained, puts them at significant risk of becoming a treifa, and therefore, if the animal is a treifa, it has that condition, it can't be eaten, but you're also not allowed to drink the milk of a treifa animal. And if these dairy cows have the condition of treifa, they are therefore Jews not allowed to drink their milk, and it leads to a pretty significant situation that most milk, that commercial milk that's out there, would not be allowed. Maybe there's, just like you always hear about the Wagyu beef, right? The cows are massaged, and they give them beer, and they, give them nice music and everything like that. Maybe you have, the equivalent of that with dairy cows, that we don't have to have that type of concern that Rav Schechter mentions. In any event, it just came to mind because, Rabbi Weissmandel talks about unhappy people drinking the milk of unhappy cows. Maybe there is that, there's a halachic corollary towards that as well. I think a lot of this, has a more spiritual component in terms of the idea of appreciating nature, and that all of nature has its purpose, and to impact nature, or to do something that may be technically permitted but doesn't have a halachically necessary purpose, or a physically life-saving or necessary purpose. It has to do with the vitality of life in general. When we talk about being kind to animals, sar balei chayim, we often think more about the tsar that is being caused. Are we causing pain or anguish? But recognize the life force, the balei chayim. They contain life. We all contain life. We all have the life force within us. Animals as well, and that means being sensitive to causing pain, even when it's necessary. If it's not absolutely necessary, life-saving, maybe we should be more sensitive, or recognize the fact of not harming animals gratuitously, or ensuring that they're ensuring the animals have a more are kept in more healthy or positive conditions, or not letting them get anxious, or not having the fly suffer needlessly and the like. There's that idea of it's more, we talk about v'chai bahem. We talk about life, and that which is our source for pikuach nefesh, that will save a life, we do whatever is necessary. We should have that level of respect for life, even if it's not to save life, but maintain life and to respect life. And a classic story about this is told about Reb Aryeh Levine and Rav Kook. It's in source number 10. This is from the book of Tzaddik in Our Time, the life of Rabbi Aryeh Levine, the Tzaddik of Yerushalayim. And Raz has a couple of anecdotes that Rabbi Aryeh wrote down himself. So this is Rabbi Aryeh's voice. I recall the early days from 1905 onward, when it was granted to me by the grace of the Blessed Lord to go up to the Holy Land, and I came to Jaffa. There I first went to visit our great master, Rabbi Abraham Isaac Cook, who received me with good cheer, as it was his hallowed custom to receive everyone. We chatted together on themes of Torah study. After an early mincha, we went out, as his hallowed custom was, to stroll a bit in the fields and gather his thoughts, and I went along. On the way, I plucked some branch or flower. Our great master was taken aback, and he told me gently, "Believe me, in all my days I've taken care never to pluck a blade of grass or flower needlessly when I had the ability to grow or blossom. The teachings of the sages, there is not a single blade of grass below here on earth which does not have a heavenly force above telling it, grow. Every sprout and leaf of grass says something, conveys some meaning. Every stone whispers some hidden message in the silence. Every creation utters its songs. Those words spoken from a pure and holy heart engraved themselves deeply on my heart. From that time on, I began to feel a strong sense of compassion for everything." So I'm not sure that I will stop swatting flies. I won't be like, please fly outside. I'm not sure I have that level of sensitivity and sympathy in me. But this is all really part of how we respect the idea, the concept of life, and Chaim in general. And with regard to this case in particular, right? Some people are, having additional sympathy and compassion for animals. You have to be sensitive. You have to be careful. There's a balance that needs to be played out, and we see that balance impacting some of the rabbinic thinking in the 19th, early 20th century in terms of the animal rights movements that emerged at that time. We see that definitely being the approach of our sages and rabbis and teachers throughout the ages, of being sympathetic and sensitive, right? And especially it comes to mind also in Rabbi Kahana's recollection of his father chiding him to behave properly and not to cause animals unnecessary pain. This comes up with regards to whether it's allowed for Jews to hunt, right? That's a similar case. The idea of hunting, obviously we're not hunting for food, hunting for sport. Is that allowed? Is that not allowed? a couple famous responses on that. Definitely, I think we're impacted by this sentiment. It seems that it's very clear that Rabbi Kahana would not be in favor of that. I don't think Rav Kook would be either, based on what we're seeing. And recognizing there's a certain equilibrium that's to be maintained between utilizing animals for our needs and our purposes, as well as recognizing, respecting, and appreciating the life force that is within every living creature. I wanted to just close. Rabbi Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg, that sits at the Sridei Eish, was asked a question about medical experimentation. Right, he's giving us a early mid 20th century perspective. And going back to what we had seen about the story of Rebbe, that he was punished for being cruel and he was rewarded for being cruel, and we saw Rabbi Yisserlin and the Rabbi Yisserlis talking about that it's permissible, but maybe there's an extra midat chasidut. Rabbi Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg feels, in my humble opinion, source 11, there's not even a midat chasidut to refrain from such research. For midat chasidut applies only where it affects only oneself, and a person has the right to be stringent on his own account, but not where it affects others. And what did you see to make you think that Tsar Baalei Chayim is a greater consideration than the Tsar sick people that they may perhaps be able to help? And therefore, my humble opinion was permit physicians to conduct experiments without any equivocation or doubt. Right? So he's some 100 years or 75 years after we saw the statements of Rabbi Kalatsky and Rabbi Kahana. Rabbi Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg is saying no. It's one thing to be sensitive when it only impacts one's own life, one's own pain, right? You want to be extra sensitive to the flies and to the bees and to the animals. You only want to do experiments to save your life, and you don't want to do it just for research. That's okay. But what about the other person? What about the people who may not be saved if the research isn't done? It almost it brings to mind that that when it comes to, we always talk about our physical needs and our spiritual needs, right? Our ruchnius and our gashmius, our spiritual needs and our physical needs. And Rabbi Yisrael Salanter very famously said, another person's gashmius is my ruchnius. Another person's physical needs are my spiritual needs. And so I think Rabbi Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg is channeling that idea and saying, yes, this is all, be sensitive, be kind, be merciful, respectful of life. At the same time, don't let that get in the way of potentially helping someone else. You want to be strict on yourself, but don't let that get in the way of helping others. Obviously, there's a spectrum, but I think that's where Rabbi Weinberg is coming from. Questions, comments, reactions?
Rabbi, forgive me if you mentioned this, but there's a concept mostly in conservative Judaism where they add the respect for animals as halachic decisions. I forget what they call it. You're familiar with it, I'm sure.
Oh, no, we were talking, I think, about Tsar Baalei Chayim, about you're not allowed to cause pain to animals.
Right, I understand, but
right. So we all agree with that.
I mean, you didn't refer to that specific movement by the conservative, did you?
I'm not sure exactly what you mean. Meaning, it's a Jewish concept to be kind to animals.
I understand. Okay.
I'm not familiar with they're having said, but there are.
I'll research it.
There has been an effort undertaken in some parts of the Jewish community, including in some parts of the Orthodox community, that when it comes to kosher food, it's not just about the food, it's about the overall establishment. You want to make sure the workers are paid on time and paid a minimum wage. That's the idea of justice that I've added to it. Again, we should always do the right thing, in terms of whether the idea of kosher for food should be extended into other aspects. That opens up a Pandora's box, because then the other factors will then be weighed in terms of whether something is kosher or not, even though it has nothing to do with the food itself. But no, I think what we saw here today, especially, was some 150, 160 years ago, there was a recognition, even within the halachic rabbinic community, about the importance of the animal rights movement. It doesn't necessarily change their eating habits or the like, but it is something that they laud as being very positive and in line with the Jewish tradition.
Thank you.
So when it comes to scientific experiments on animals, I mean, the nature, bad choice of words, the characteristics of science are, we don't know if this specific experiment is going to bear fruit towards a direct, towards a direct benefit, health benefit towards Jewish people. So I mean, when it comes to those scientific experiments, I'm sorry, but I fall on the side of being liberal with these experiments. So that's just my perspective. But the other thing that I wanted to ask about is, when it comes to Hilchos Shabbos, there's always this question of Psik Reisha v'lo Yamus, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that the idea of that Psik Reisha was that the father wanted to create a toy of some kind for his kid, something to play with, and cut off the chicken's head. Am I wrong about that? Is that?
Well, Psik Reisha, you mean the concept of Psik Reisha, or?
I'm saying. So here we have an example of someone cutting off the. I'm not going to Hilchos Shabbos. I'm saying
Right.
that the father was cutting off the head of a chicken just to give his son something to amuse himself. How does that fall in with the Tsar Balei Chaim?
Well, it's just similar to Rabbi Yehuda Anasi. Maybe it was useful. Maybe it was helpful.
Okay.
Maybe it was after the chicken was slaughtered, or as
Okay.
the part of it being slaughtered. I think look, in general, also tying in your first point, I think if it's done within the context of a scientific research institution,
Yeah.
then we have then we see benefit for man. Again, that's if you trust the NIH and these types of things, which not everyone does these days anymore. But if you see the institutional world, the scientific community heading towards benefiting humanity, I think that it's not being liberal. It's certainly embracing the Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg, I think, approach. I think to just kind of in your basement start doing this kind of thing and saying if animals are not human beings, and you may be getting some information or some experience or some sick recreation, then you start bordering up not necessarily a violation of Tsar Balei Chaim, but certainly the Midat Chasidut that Rabbi Yisrael and the Ramah were talking about.
Right. Okay. Right. Thank you.
So I believe all the monkeys have been caught, and we learned our lessons from the monkeys. And I think that part of it is there's the technical animal aspect, and there's the idea of appreciation of Baal Chai, that those were a little bit more spiritually sensitive, maybe mystically or spiritually, kabbalistically motivated, were embracing, like the Rav Cooks and the Rav Aryeh Levines, and definitely some food for thought. Yes, Miriam.
Would you paskin that we look for products that aren't about, life-saving things like shampoo and things like that? Now, if somebody claims we don't do animal testing, things that are incidental in life.
Right. Yes, I think that this is more the food you eat and the leather you wear and the products that we use. There's a recognition that comes at a cost. Right, that may come at the cost of animal life, which Jewish law would allow for. Jewish law would prefer it to be done in a humane fashion, for example. Right, we don't talk about you can't use Balei Chaim. We talk about the Tsar Balei Chaim. And then I think that when you get into things that are completely unnecessary, and I'm not sure we can define what's completely unnecessary except for ourselves. Right, I think that's something you learn out of from the Sridei Isha's final comment as well. Right? If I can live without that shampoo, then maybe that is something nice for me not to utilize. But I can't claim that this is not necessary for two reasons. I can't make those proclamations for someone else, and B, we haven't really crossed a halachic boundary. So I think that's those are things to consider. But as you extend it away from the more the scientific research or food and clothing to the more optional realms, that's where we get where individuals will start will start can make those calculations, and then sometimes we see that those people make those calculations for others by having campaigns or organizations or environmental groups and the like. And I think this is related to what we've spoken about before about Judaism or halakha in the environment. One of the major challenges for there being a more proactive environmentalist thrust in halakha and an Orthodox Jewish practice is because of the fact that it's a more optional realm. It's the realm of Midat Chasidut. And it's also been co-opted by much of the non-halachic Jewish world. And so I think we can go back to the basics and the bases of no tsar ba'alei chayim. Individuals can be more sympathetic and should be sensitive. And we only make major statements where there's a flagrant or more obvious violation. Right. So, for example, the Rav Schechter on dairy cows was his analysis of that situation. Maybe something parallel would be veal or foie gras, which there have been rabbinic authorities who have said that this is not appropriate because the animals are not treated well. Or Moshe Feinstein, I think, spoke about veal.
Yeah.
So you see that there's some crossover into that, but it hasn't necessarily fully been embraced. Part of that is that the threshold for permissibility in these actions is that the animals are there for us, and it's a much more personalized or ethical scale when it comes to going beyond. So I think that would be shampoo would be one of those issues, not necessarily one I have to worry about.
Okay.
All right. Very good studying with everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.